My name is Micah, and I'm the lead pastor here at the church, and really excited to move forward in a series that we've been in as a church called All Things. All Things, and the idea behind this series is that God is, first of all, present, which I think is in itself profound, the idea that God is not far off, that he's sort of wound up the universe and has let it running, but that he is present and that he is working in all things for the good of those who, what? Love him and are called according to his purpose. Romans 8:28 is where that comes from, and that is the premise of our series, The Promise, from Romans 8:28. And this purpose, each one of you could share purposes that you have for your life. What is a purpose that you feel like you're here for? And we could talk about the different ways that we're wired and put together. But this purpose that God has for us is something that is identified in the very next verse after this promise. We read and we learn that God's purpose is to make us more like Jesus. Now, when we understand this, when we realize that God's primary purpose for us is not that we would be temporarily happy or comfortable or have ease or have everything go the way we want, but that his purpose is to shape us in the image of Jesus, what it does is it transforms our perspective of the inconveniences and the obstacles of life. Rather than just being inconveniences, really, they are tools in the hands of a master craftsman. I was thinking about that very thing this week, different trades where people shape material, whether it's clay or wood, or I have a buddy who's a really amazing leather worker. And I was thinking, if materials could talk, what would they say to the idea of being pressed or whittled or cut or carved or twisted? What would materials say? Probably stop, yeah. But we know that in the right hands, by the end, what you have is a beautiful work of art where most every one of us would say it was worth it. And that is what God is doing with each one of us. Some of these tools that we've talked about, if you will, include weakness, the shortcomings we have where we think, God, if you just take this thing away, I could really make progress. And God's like, no, because that's when my power is going to be magnified in your weakness. Another one of these tools is affliction. The word literally in the Bible means pressure. The pressure of life that we feel, we're like, God, just take away that pressure. But we've also looked at characters in the Bible who experience these tools maybe more than most. You have Paul, who talked about all of the affliction he faced. You have David, who went through so many different things in his life, different characters. Joseph was another one that we talked about. And in case, by the way, you're wondering, we are going to highlight some women in the Bible in the weeks to come in this series. But today we're going to talk about a man in the Bible who experienced, I believe, more devastation, discouragement, and disillusionment than I would say probably any of us ever will. This is a man who also, though, came to see God in a way that he otherwise would not have seen him. This man is Job. And as we prepare to look at the story of Job this morning, it's a story that is pretty well known. I want to begin with this question. Would you rather have a life free of suffering or see God? Think about that. And just to be clear, this is not like a rhetorical question, of course, like where I'm in church, so the answer, of course, is see God, Like the little kid in nursery was like, Jesus, the answer. I don't know the answer, but it's got to be Jesus. Really think about that. Would I rather be comfortable? Would I rather be at ease, wealthy, have everything that go the way I want it to, or have a deep personal encounter with God? That's just to prime the pump as we turn in our Bibles to the book of Job. The verses, just so you know, if you're new with us, we're going to be looking at some verses in the book of Job, moving through it quickly, but they'll be on the screen. You're welcome to follow along. There's Bibles in the seat backs. Page 417 is where you can find the book of Job. But I have to confess with you a little bit that I hesitated to include Job in this series. I thought there's other ones that I'd rather do. And the reason is, I guess there's multiple. There's this sort of theological minefield that you have to navigate through the book in order to get to kind of the point. The other reason is the premise of the entire book is a conversation between Satan and God, for which we don't have a ton of theological context, right? God and Satan sort of going back and forth about this guy, Job. And I'm like, what do you do with that? But I just kind of had to go there because of everything Job went through, but everything God brought into his life as a result of his experience. There's some powerful truths I think God wants us to see. So right out of the gate, Job 1 verse 1 says this. We learned that there was a man in the land of Uz named Job, and that man was blameless and upright, one who feared God and turned away from evil. So this is a mouthful of a first verse. It tells us a lot about Job's character. It says he was blameless. And I want to just clarify, when you read about this in the Bible, David is another one who refers to even himself as blameless. This is not moral perfection. This doesn't mean I never make mistakes. You know that from the story of David. That can't possibly be what he meant. What it means is that the direction of your life is always moving toward God. And that's what it says, a man who turned away from evil. He was continually moving toward God in everything that he went through. So this is Job, and we learn in verse 2 of this chapter, he had 7 sons and 3 daughters, as well as thousands and thousands of sheep and camels and donkeys and oxen, leading to this statement in verse 3 that this man was the greatest of all the people of the East. Some translations say he was the richest man in that entire place. So we learn about Job. He's a godly man. He's wealthy, which, by the way, those things can coexist. They're not a contradiction necessarily. He's wealthy, he's generous, he's godly, and he's someone who has God's attention, so to speak. Because we see as we continue to verse 8, one day the Lord said to Satan, Satan, by the way, comes before God. We're not going to go into all the details of what is going on here. What is Satan doing? How does he come before God? But he comes before God in verse 8, and it says, the Lord said to Satan, have you considered my servant Job? That there is none like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man who fears God and turns away from evil. Now, typically with Satan, you would expect Satan to come before God and accuse. That's kind of one of his titles in the Bible, the accuser. Look he failed again. You should punish him. And we see Jesus as the interceder, the defender, the advocate on our behalf. But it's interesting, Satan doesn't even mention Job. God brings him up. Satan, have you noticed this guy who walks with me, who turns away from evil and turns toward me continually? And he's basically bragging on Job. He's proud of Job. But verse 9, then Satan answered the Lord and said, does Job fear God for no reason? Have you not put a hedge around him and his house and all that he has on every side? You have blessed the work of his hands, and his possessions have increased in the land. But stretch out your hand and touch all that he has, and he will curse you to your face. Sort of a challenge. And the Lord said to Satan, behold, all that he has is in your hand. Only against him do not stretch out your hand. So understand the basic argument that Satan is making here with God is the only reason Job loves you is because you've blessed him. So God says, okay, take away the blessings. Let's see what happens. So in verse 14, as you continue in the story, a messenger runs up to Job and tells him that his oxen and his donkeys have been stolen and the servants watching over them were killed. While that messenger is still talking, another one runs up and presumably interrupts and says, Job, a fire from heaven came down and burned up your sheep, and all your servants are dead. Then while that servant was still talking, it says, another came up and said, your camels have been stolen by 3 groups of Chaldeans, and your servants have been killed. Finally, as if that's not enough to lose your entire livelihood, it says, while that servant was still speaking, so I don't know if this was like a minute that this all took place, one last servant came up and said, Job, your children were together in this house, and a great wind came across the wilderness and struck the 4 corners of the house, and it fell upon the young people. In a moment, all of his livelihood, his children, gone. Now, you've heard the expression, raise your hand if you've heard the expression, too good to be true. This is too bad to be true almost. But we know from the context of the story, this is not just some series of random coincidences. This is a coordinated attack against Job. One thing after another is taken away from him. And verse 20 says, then Job arose and tore his robe and shaved his head and fell on the ground and worshiped. And he said, naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked shall I return. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. So this reveals Job's his uprightness, his righteousness, as it says in verse 1. Not moral perfection, but this commitment to move toward God in whatever he's going through. Verse 22 says, in all this, Job did not sin or charge God with wrong. He didn't curse God as Satan thought he would. And in fact, he concludes, God gives and God can take away. You know what that reveals? Which of us has something that we did not receive from God? The breath in our lungs, what did we do for that? Nothing. And God himself articulates this truth in the last part of this book. God says, who has first given to me that I should repay him? What's the answer? What's the answer? No one. No one has. God doesn't owe anything to anyone, so Job, rather than cursing, he blesses God. He worships. But Satan comes back, verse 3. The Lord said to Satan, again, God brings him up and says, have you considered my servant Job? I just feel like there's got to be some humor in this with these. But that there is none like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man who fears God and turns away from evil. He still holds fast his integrity, even though you incited me against him to destroy him without reason. It's very important to note there was no reason for Job to go through this. He did nothing to deserve this, so to speak. But while God is celebrating Job's integrity, Satan again plays the devil's advocate because he is the devil. Yeah, so anyway. So he says, oh, okay, God, fine, but stretch out your hand and touch his bone and his flesh, and he will curse you to his face, to your face, rather. And the Lord said to Satan, behold, he is in your hand. Only spare his life. Don't kill him. So, Satan at this point afflicts Job with these horrible sores from head to foot. Now, you don't raise your hand, but anyone ever have a sore? A mouth sore, some sort of, and it gets all your attention, doesn't it? But imagine being covered from head to foot in sores. And just so we have a taste, a glimpse of the pain that Job was enduring in this, because I just picture generic sores and bummer for you, man. But I want to read 8 brief statements by Job taken from different places of his journey, just to get a picture of what he's going through. And these will be up on the screen so you're not having to flip around. In chapter 7, he says, my flesh is clothed with worms and dirt. By the way, kids, that's not the dessert. That's different. Okay, sorry. That's bad taste. Worms and dirt. I love that, by the way, but not here. My flesh literally is clothed with worms and dirt. My skin hardens and then breaks out again. Chapter 30, he says, my skin turns black and falls from me, and my bones burn with heat. Another place it says, Job scraped his skin with a piece of broken pottery as he sat among the ashes. Which, by the way, was, I think, considered to be a sanitary place to be in that time. Then beyond the source, chapter 30, he says, at night my bones are filled with pain, which gnaws at me relentlessly. So it goes deep into his bones. Another one, I have been reduced to skin and bones. So I'm assuming he's not eating, he's emaciated. And then the emotional distress. My heart is troubled and restless. Days of suffering torment me. I walk in gloom without sunlight. And it's so bad, Job says, I would rather be strangled and die than suffer like this. I hate my life, and I don't want to go on living. Now, this is on top of losing his entire livelihood, losing all of his children, and this is where his marriage starts to experience stress, right? Chapter 19, by the way, Job says, my breath is repulsive to my wife. Now, if you're experiencing that, there's ways to deal with that. Just come talk to me. But the second half of the verse captures the idea that he's communicating, I am rejected by my own family. Speaking of Job's wife, picture her. Somehow she's been able to endure the loss of their entire livelihood, the loss of their children. We think Job had it bad. I can't imagine what his wife must be experiencing right now. But so far she's managed to make it, and then at this point when she sees her husband like this, it's too much. And this is where in chapter 2, his wife said to him, are you still trying to maintain your integrity? Curse God and die. Now, severe as this may sound, let's just consider what this woman has been through. I can't imagine losing one child. Many of you have. much less every single one of your children. And it's interesting that her words are so brief to Job here. In the Septuagint, which is actually a Greek version of the Old Testament from around Jesus' time, the Septuagint has this longer statement by Job's wife. And I just wanted to read it. It's very interesting. She says, "How long will you hold out and say, 'Behold, I wait yet a little while, expecting hope of my deliverance'? For behold," she says to Job, "your memory is cut off from the earth. Even your sons and your daughters, the pangs and pains of my womb, which I bore in vain with sorrows. And though you sit down to spend the nights in the open air among the corruption of worms, I am a wanderer and a servant from place to place and house to house, waiting for the setting of the sun, that I may rest from my labors and my pains which now beset me. Now curse God and die." See, his wife looks at their situation and says, even death is better than this, Job. Clearly, God is against you. Just curse him and be done with it. But in verse 10, Job says, "You talk like one of the foolish women. Should we accept only good things from the hand of God and never anything bad?" So in all of this, Job did not sin in what he said. So if you put together Job's responses to the pain he was enduring, he begins with, "The Lord gives," and what? "The Lord takes away. God is sovereign over my life. He's the one who gave me breath. He can take the breath away if he wants to. I'm not God." But then he adds to that sort of theology statement here. He says, basically, the Lord gives good. Why would we not accept bad? However, whenever it may come to us. How strong would our faith be, honey, if we only blessed God when things were easy? Job says, "You're talking like a foolish woman," which I think is a veiled compliment. You may be like, wait, what? He doesn't say you're a foolish woman. You're talking like one of the foolish women is literally what he says. In other words, honey, this isn't you. You're wise. You've always been here for me. You've been my greatest support. This is not your character. After this interaction, things are so low for Job. He's lost everything. He's lost his kids. His marriage is tense. And this is where we meet his friends. His friends, chapter 2, when 3 of Job's friends heard of the tragedy he suffered, they got together and traveled from their homes to comfort and console him. Their names were Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Naamathite. Now, if you're looking for baby names, some options there. But we know these guys most often for the bad advice they give to Job for like 35 chapters of this book. But I want to point out really briefly, because it's a side note in Job's story, some good things they did, okay? From this verse, they came. They came to Job. They weren't too busy. They took the time to show up. It's important. The other thing they did, they coordinated their visit. It says they got together. They contacted one another and said, what is the best way we can help and support our friend? Good, right? The third thing they did is, this was the purpose for them coming, was to comfort and to console him. That was their motivation. They had good intentions. And then when they got there, verse 12 says, when they saw Job from a distance, they scarcely recognized him. That says a lot about his condition at this point. Wailing loudly, they tore their robes and threw dust into the air over their heads to show their grief. Then they sat on the ground with him for 7 days and nights. No one said a word to Job, for they saw that his suffering was too great for words. So I want to just give a little bit of credit to his friends. They came and they coordinated their visit. They comforted him, and they also showed compassion. They didn't stand at a distance and stare at him and go, whoa. They sat down with him and they wept with him, and they were silent for 7 days and nights. And you could very properly say this was probably their high point. Because then they began to talk. And everything went downhill. And by the way, I should point out, is it wrong to talk to a friend who's going through something hard? No. It all depends on what you say, right? Rather than saying, Job, I'm so sorry this has happened to you. Job, we're with you. Rather than that, they began offering wordy theological explanations for why all this had happened to him. And we're not going to go into all of that in detail, but it's because it's literally like 35 chapters, the majority of the book, back and forth. But if I could summarize personally the message of these three friends, here's what I would say in a sentence. All these chapters condensed into a sentence. You ready? Job, the reason this happened to you is because you sinned. You've done something wrong, Job. Clearly, this doesn't happen to someone who walks uprightly. Right? It makes sense. This is basically what these three guys can agree upon. And just to get a sense for the nuances of each one of their perspectives, I'm going to offer one statement from each one of them, okay? First of all, Eliphaz, chapter 4, says to Job, remember, I love that, it's like this pedantic, you know the answer, Job, you just got to admit it. Remember, who that was innocent ever perished? As I have seen, those who plow iniquity and sow trouble reap the same. In other words, Job, you did something wrong and you know it. That's why this is happening. Bildad chimes in and says, Job, if you pray to God and seek the favor of the Almighty, and if you're pure and live with integrity, He will surely rise up and restore your happy home. Oh, cool. I didn't know it was that simple. And then finally, Zophar, he's a little bit more blunt. He says, it's because of your wickedness. There's no limit to your sins. Ouch, bro. So Job's friends come to comfort him, and it kind of backfires, which you can see in Job's responses to them. In chapter 16, Job says, what miserable comforters you are. At another point, he says, if only you could be silent, that's the wisest thing you could do. There's wisdom in that. But in that same chapter, Job says, your platitudes are as valuable as ashes. That's what his friends are giving him, by the way. Hasty theological conclusions based on limited information. They don't know why Job is suffering, but in their sincere desire to help, which I think is important to remember, they start throwing out these neatly packaged platitudes that are frankly wrong, at least in Job's case. Because we have to think, I think, comprehensively about this. Is it true that sometimes suffering is a result of sin? Yes. Sometimes that is true, and you see many examples in the Bible. Sodom and Gomorrah is this classic example of fire coming down because of wickedness. You have plagues, and you have these famines and droughts. The problem is that's not always the case, and certainly not for Job. In fact, I was thinking about this. If anything, Job's suffering is because he's righteous. You remember the beginning of it? God's like, consider my servant, how righteous he is. If anything, this is because he is righteous, not wicked. So I think the lesson there is important for us to be able to say in these situations, I don't know. Can you say those three words with me? I don't know. That's where his friends went off track. His friends are saying suffering is always because of sin. Clearly, Job, you've done something wrong. And to be fair, we could make the opposite mistake in response to the story of Job and say suffering is never because of sin. And we're making the same mistake, but on the opposite end of the spectrum, when the reality is, I don't always know. We don't know. We don't always know what's going on here. But Job is frustrated with his friends. Obviously, he's also frustrated with God. He wants to know why he's suffering. He's over and over defending himself. He's saying, I have not done anything wrong. I am righteous before God, right? And he's insisting on this. He even curses the day he was born. Why was I even born if this is my life? Chapter 3 is a heavy one, but Job says there, why wasn't I born dead? Why didn't I die as I came from the womb? So he's clearly frustrated. And you notice, though, throughout the book, Job continually directs his complaint to God. I think it's a fascinating observation that his friends are exclusively operating in the horizontal. They're talking to Job. This is what's wrong. I know because I have experience and I've lived life, and here's your problem, right? Job, if you'll notice, he responds, but then he's like, my appeal is to the Lord, which is the essence of faith. He's going through this horrible time. He's super discouraged, but he turns his attention to God. He's venting, but he's venting to God. If sin is separation from God, faith is connection. You know, these 35 chapters, Job and his friends go back and forth, and throughout this entire time of Job basically saying, why is this happening, God? Why are you doing this? Because Job does begin to sort of put God on trial. God, why is this happening to me? What are you doing to me? Why are you doing this, God? And at the end of this 35 chapters where Job and his friends are talking, throughout which time God is silent. At the end of this time, along with another guy, Elihu, younger dude, who interjects his perspective. We don't have time to go into that. God doesn't comment on it, so I won't. Chapter 38, God speaks. And at this point, you may expect God, who has perfect knowledge of everything, to come in and tell them where they were wrong. This is why you're wrong, this is what you're doing, or maybe just start quoting a bunch of scripture. But questions is what God enters in with. Questions, not one question or two questions or three questions. You know how many questions? 77 questions. I don't know how many questions you've asked someone in a row. I've never made it to 77. But I do know questions, and maybe you've experienced this, are like the best way to teach someone. Rather than coming at someone with the answer, you're actually just learning to ask the right questions to get them to think. And God, the clearly perfect instructor, comes to Job with 77 questions. Now, I was tempted to read through all of them. I won't. But I do want to read 20. I selected 20 out of these chapters where God is asking him one question after another. And if you want to even close your eyes, just to get a taste for what Job experienced in this moment. So picture Job. He's suffering, almost unrecognizable. He's lost everything. His kids are gone. His marriage is struggling. His friends are not really friends right now. And he's mad at God. He's frustrated. He wants to know why this has happened. And then chapter 38, he speaks. God speaks. It says, out of the whirlwind. And listen to these questions. Where were you, Job, when I laid the foundations of the earth? Tell me if you know so much. Who determined its dimensions? What supports its foundations? Who keeps the sea inside its boundaries? Have you ever commanded the morning to appear and caused the dawn to rise in the east? Have you made daylight spread to the ends of the earth, Job? Have you explored the springs from which the seas come? Have you explored their depths? Do you know where the gates of death are located? Where does light come from? And where does darkness go? And then God says, with a bit of divine sarcasm, of course you know all this. For you were born before it was all created, and you were so very experienced. He continues, have you visited the storehouses of the snow or seen the storehouses of hail? Who makes the rain fall on barren land in a desert where no one lives? Who sends rain to satisfy the parched ground and make the tender grass spring up? Can you direct the movement of the stars, Job? Can you direct the constellations through the seasons? Do you know the laws of the universe? Can you use them to regulate the earth? Can you shout to the clouds and make it rain? That one's funny to me. Can you make lightning appear and cause it to strike as you direct? Oh, and who gives intuition to the heart and instinct to the mind? Question after question after question, and each one Job realizing more and more how little he understands. Which is a contrast, by the way, to the previous 35 chapters where they knew the answers. They understood all of it. Job, this is why this is happening. And then Job responds with his understanding of things. And then he suddenly realizes, I have limited knowledge, power, and I'm limited by time and space. And God, in contrast, has unlimited knowledge, unlimited power, and is present in all times, at all times. This huge contrast is created, and Job, sort of shell-shocked by these questions, offers this response in the last chapter of the book. Then Job replied to the Lord, I know that you can do anything and no one can stop you. You asked me, who is this that questions my wisdom with such ignorance? It is I. And I was talking about things I knew nothing about, things far too wonderful for me. So it's important, later in this chapter, God tells Job that his friends spoke wrongly of God, whereas Job did not. He says, Job has not spoken wrongly of me. He's spoken accurately of me, unlike the friends. And I think it's important to note that Job spoke rightly of God. He didn't curse God. He didn't accuse God of wrong. But nonetheless, he was speaking of things he did not understand. And that's why all of these questions come at Job. And he continues talking to God and says, you said, listen, and I will speak. I have some questions for you, and you must answer them. And then Job says, I had only heard about you before, but now I have seen you with my own eyes. I take back everything I said, and I sit in dust and ashes. See, Job, before this moment, Job had heard about God. Let's just say his theology was correct. But this is the first time he really saw and experienced God. Realized that God was there the whole time and that God has purposes that we can't possibly comprehend and understand. And I think of this as the moment for Job that platitudes are replaced by presence. The platitudes of the last 35 chapters are just wiped away by the presence of God. And I think God wants that for every one of us. That he wants not just we have these correct beliefs and we have them lined out properly, or we have these religious activities, I go to church, I do these things. That's not it. God said, I want you to experience me, which is why David in one of the Psalms says, seek the presence of the Lord continually. Seek after him. Don't settle for the platitudes. This is what happens for Job, and by the end of his life, fast forwarding, God, it says, restored all of his fortune. In fact, twice the animals that he had in the beginning, and 10 more children on top of the 10 that he had who were waiting for him. And I remember as a kid thinking, God did this, he restored all of his fortunes because Job passed the test. As a kid, I was like, that's why. Or at one point I remember thinking, I bet God restored all of his fortunes as sort of an apology for all the trouble that he put Job through or allowed Job to endure. But remember God's question in chapter 41, which I mentioned earlier, where God says, who is first given to me that I should repay him? See, God isn't restoring Job's fortunes because he passed the test or because of the trouble he caused him. He's restoring his fortunes because he's God. The Lord gives, and the Lord takes away. And in this case, gives again. We're going to watch a story right now by a man named Tim Skalski. Many of you know him. He's a man in our church. Tim shared with me recently about how Romans 8:28 is sort of a cornerstone verse for his life, but that he's really connected some of the challenges of his past couple years to this series that we're going through. And so I asked Tim if he would be willing to share his story, and we videoed this, and we're going to watch this right now, and then I'll stand up and close us. Let's watch.
It wasn't really a cancer journey, it was a Jesus journey of becoming closer and closer and closer to him, even though the outcome wasn't what I wanted. Micah introduced the new series, All Things. It really hit me hard. Because of course, Romans 8:28 is a huge verse for many people, but for me, it guides who I am. I was saved at 12, but I really became a follower at 30, and that was around the time I was getting divorced, and thought, well, here I am about to get divorced. Is this really what you mean by all things? And I did. I leaned into it, and I trusted in what that verse told me. All the things that happened in my life, I started to see, whether good or bad, God was working in it. Fast forward to, I remember feeling like I wanted to be married again. Before I knew it, here the Lord provided me with this woman, Jamie, who was everything I needed for a Christian marriage. And it was hard, it was a struggle. But I remember the day we got married, I said, I don't think I've ever been this happy in my whole life. And it harkened back to all things. And it was such all things in my life, here I am getting this opportunity again. I remember specifically the first time I heard she got cancer. And she told me that it was beatable. She said that they felt like it was something that it was a common cancer, it was curable. I came back home and I wrote Romans 8:28 on a piece of paper and hung it on the fridge. And I thought, well, here's a great opportunity to take all things in my life and see what it's going to do. First week or so we spent going to the hospital every single day. I never really heard what they were telling us until literally a month later. And I was sitting in an appointment of, talking about the drugs we were going to take, and the doctor said, this one will give her about 18 to 24 months. I'm not even kidding you, we'd probably already done 20 appointments, and it had been talked about many times, and I don't think I ever actually heard what he said, but at that moment, I heard his words, and I said to him, what do you mean 18 to 24 months? And he gave me this weird look, and he kind of cocked his head and was like, did you know this cancer is going to kill your wife? Jamie looks at me funny, and I just kind of shake my head. I'm like, yeah, I knew that. Fast forward to the end of the appointment, we would always go do something fun after those appointments and kind of gather our thoughts and put together what we wanted to tell people, what was going on, and think of things we needed to be prayed about, and so on and so forth. We pulled up to this, the grocery store, this good food store. We go have coffee and have a little bit of lunch, and I didn't say much, and we pulled up, and Jamie's like, what's wrong with you? And I just kind of like exploded with anger. I was swearing, I was carrying on, I was really so mad at God. I was like, because it just dawned on me that, of course we prayed for a miracle and we prayed for healing, but the fact that it'd been a month, and it just took me that long to hear that the prognosis was not good, and it wasn't going to be pretty, and your wife is going to die. I didn't like that, to the point where I was screaming so loud, and I remember slamming this steering wheel so many times with my hand that I had bruises, and it hurt. And I remember the rage was unbelievable, and when I calmed down, my wife looks at me and goes, are you done with that temper tantrum? And she started to say, do you not understand what we're facing? And I said, yeah, I think I do now. And she said, well, I need you to be right here. I need you to be with me in this. I need you to walk this with us, or walk this together. I need you to be here, and I need you to listen. And I remember thinking to myself, is this what he means by all things? How could this seriously be something for my good? It was a long journey. She fought like crazy. A lot of you are very familiar with that, the amount of pain and suffering she went through. But some people asked me, like, she had an amazing cancer journey. And from that point in the car, when we decided that we were going to be here and present, it wasn't really a cancer journey. It was a Jesus journey of becoming closer and closer and closer to him, even though the outcome wasn't what I wanted. And I remember the morning of the funeral, just thinking, what am I going to say to all these people that don't know Jesus, and all these people that probably prayed that weren't even Christians for healing, because she's dead. And here I am. And it kind of dawned on me that God did heal her, it's just not the way I wanted it. And it was a kind of a weight that lifted off me, made me start the journey. It was another journey after she passed, to lean into all the things that were happening in my life. How was that going to be? And how was he going to be there for me? To the point now where here I am a year and a half out since she's passed away, and I can see good in this. And I know that seems so counter-culture, counter what some people think, but I've leaned so much into God now that I think he's carrying me all the way, and in all things in this life, good and bad, he's there. So I'm a year and a half out from this journey, and here I'm starting to find joy in things that I could never imagine. Because when you go through watching your life partner, your best friend, your partner in crime die, it's really hard to feel like you could ever be happy again. In Job, at the end, it's like everything is restored to him, and then some. And here I am again, like I said, a certain part out from when she passed away, and I can see God working in my life and restoring some happy things, and walking this journey and knowing that God is writing out the story of my life, and that was part of it, and to see where he's working towards now. Of course, in the beginning, it was so traumatic and so awful, but now I don't look at it as that anymore. I look at it as a connection, something God used in my life to draw me closer and closer and closer to Him. Yeah, it's been a year and a half, and there'll be times when I can't function for the day because I can't get past some of the hurt. But then there's days when that hurt turns into joy. And the only way you can do that is through Jesus.
I was thinking this week, I wonder what Job wanted. You can kind of pull it out of the different things he says. I think more than anything, he probably wanted to know why. And I would say he probably wanted it all to stop. But what did Job need? He needed an encounter with God. He needed to know that God was with him, even in all of the horrible things that he faced. And I think that's why God, in his interactions with Job, he never once tells him why. He doesn't say, well, there was this conversation, Satan, and here's... And I think the reason is, that's not what Job needed. He might have wanted that. What he needed was to see God. To be able to say, man, before I'd heard of you, but now I know you. I see you. What he needed was a new perspective, that this was not a Job story. This was not a suffering story. This is a Jesus story. And we may hear that and think, well, Jesus hadn't come yet. Job's one of the oldest stories in the Bible. But you know what? Job makes a surprisingly powerful, prophetic, messianic statement right in the middle of his book. In chapter 19, Job says this, right before the statement. He says, oh, that my words were written. Oh, that they were inscribed in a book. It's safe to say, I think he got his wish, yeah? But why would he say this? The reason is he understood the significance that his story was really a tiny part of his story. And he got this, we see, because right after he said that, oh, that my words were written in a book, oh, that they were engraved in a rock forever. Why? The very next verse, for I know that my Redeemer lives. And in the end, he will stand upon the earth. And after my skin has been destroyed, yet in my flesh I shall see God. It is wild that Job had the wisdom and the foresight to know that one day when all of this suffering was over, a Redeemer would come. And that even though this flesh wasted away, he would stand on the earth and see that Redeemer with his own eyes. What a statement. And that is the story that every one of our little stories is a part of. It's not a story of Micah. It's not even a story of Mac. It's a story of Jesus, our Redeemer, who is with us. And I just want to acknowledge we may not have the same story as Job. Most of us don't have the same wealth. You may not have the same problems as Job, but I can tell you and guarantee today that we have the same God as Job. We have the same God who is present in all of it, who is working in all of it, who is always good and always working for the good of those who love him and are called according to his purpose. I want to close with prayer, but before we do that, I want to just end with two questions for you to just write down and think about. And by the way, if you get tired of my questions, just be glad there's not 77. It's two. Are you moving toward God? That's what we see in Job. And if you read it, it's raw, it's rough. I mean, I think about David, who said some horrible things about his enemies, but he said them to God. Everything in his life was this faith momentum that continually pushed him back to God. And maybe you're carrying something alone. Maybe you've talked to other people. I want to just encourage you this week to take one step toward God. God, walk with me through this. God, show me where you are. The second question and the last one, is there anything going on in your life where you have pronounced a theological conclusion that God maybe has not pronounced? Maybe it's in your life, maybe it's in a friend's life, where it's hard and you're trying to understand, and so you've drawn conclusions that may not be correct. You know, it strikes me that Job, probably this entire journey for him, thought that God was against him. Who wouldn't, right? But what do we know? God could not have been any more for him. All of this happened because God was so for Job, so proud of Job. And so maybe for you, it's just that shift in thinking. God is for me. He is for me. Maybe you hear these two questions and you're like, I don't even know where to start. And for that, I just want to offer some afternoon reading to you. Psalm 139 is this psalm written by David where he tracks and covers the same characteristics of God that are revealed in the questions that God asked Job. God's omniscience. He's all-knowing. His omnipotence. He is all-powerful. His omnipresence. He is everywhere all the time, in all times. And David unpacks this picture of God in Psalm 139. And in verse 6, his response to these characteristics is, such knowledge is too wonderful for me. It's too high. I cannot attain it. That's the right response, by the way. But then listen to the last verses of this psalm, which is what I want to offer you as a tool for you to move toward God, and then we'll pray. David says this, search me, O God, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts. Point out anything in me that offends you and lead me along the path of everlasting life. Let's pray. Oh God, that is our prayer. We are so small in light of your glory. We are so helpless in light of your power. And we are so clueless in light of your sovereignty, God. But you are God, and you draw near to those who are low and broken and humbled. And so, God, we do ask that you would search us, that you would look at those anxious thoughts in each one of our hearts, and you'd speak to them, and you'd say, be silent, be calm. And you'd bring that experience of your presence that we so desperately need. We love you, God, and we thank you for Job's story. We thank you for Tim's story and for the thousands others like him that illustrate over and over and over again your faithfulness.